Hello, Ian. It's lovely to talk to you about Casa Ioana, a charity which marks this year its 25th anniversary, but also to talk about the many challenges that the pandemic has brought, particularly for the charity sector, but the wider society as well, I would say. But let's start with the beginning. When did you first come to Romania, and what was your impression then?
I first came to Romania in the beginning of 1990. I drove to Romania with a pediatric nurse in a van full of medical equipment and various other aid to work in what was called a home hospital, which is an institution for profoundly disabled children and young people. So my task was to look after 20 youngsters aged between 8 and 9 years of age, all half the size of a normal 8 or 9-year-old. They'd all been kept in their cots, so they were cot bound, still being bottle fed at 8, 9 years of age. If you went near trying to lift them out of their cots, they would just scream uncontrollably. And yet in the space of just 4 weeks, we managed to get the children out of their cots onto the floor, out into the sunshine for the first time, we suspect. They were interacting with each other for the first time. 3 or 4 were starting to walk, so we taught them how to walk as well. And of course, once they found their legs, they were just little explorers wanting to explore everything in the whole world.
So many British people have a similar experience. They went to Romania at the beginning of the 90s after the collapse of communism. And I remember very well those years, how grey they were, how difficult they were. And then came back to England and said, well, I must go back. I must do something more. And I just think you probably have a similar story.
Yes, I mean, once we had driven back to the UK from Romania on the first visit, during the first part of the journey, I confessed to having thought that would be my one and only trip to Romania. I mean, it was all my years in the police had never quite prepared me for what I met in that institution. So, and as you say, I mean, in those days, there wasn't too much colour, wasn't too many bright lights. So it was quite a grey place. But as soon as we started getting closer to the UK, it was like this huge magnet on your back being pulled back to Romania. So I travelled backwards and forwards for a few months to set up an aid convoy, if you like. So in April 1991, I returned to Romania with 300 people, 100 vehicles, and £250,000 we had managed to raise with a local newspaper. And we spent, again, 2 weeks in Romania. But it was at that stage I realised that what was really needed were long-term projects.
So let's talk about Casa Ioana now. What's the birth of Casa Ioana? How did it all start?
Casa Ioana started back in 1995. So originally I was working on a project which was called Joanne House in Ferentar, which became a local resource centre for local NGOs. But then when the British charity withdrew, instead of closing it down, I was encouraged by Romanian friends and people I was working with to create a Romanian organisation, which we did. And of course, it was called, after Joanne House, it was called Casa Ioana. And then in 1997, the mayor for Bucharest asked me to open the country's first night shelter for homeless people, which I actually kind of declined to begin with because I had no experience whatsoever, but he insisted. So myself and some colleagues started meeting homeless people around Gara de Nord and in various parks. And over the course of a few weeks, we managed to get 20 together who met on a regular basis. And it was then when I said, you know, I asked them, tell me what a night shelter is, because I've been tasked with building one. So tell me what's needed. And they insisted that I was the expert. But then it didn't take them very long to understand that they were experts by their own experiences. So they were very vocal in suggesting what should be provided and everything else. And we did it. Basically, on that, we just met their needs, I guess. But we also went one step further, and I employed two of the shelter residents to be supervisors. So they were responsible for looking after the shelter, making it clean, doing the cooking in the evenings and so on. And the mayor was very surprised to find that two homeless people were being employed to supervise. But at the end of the day, who better to supervise than people with that sort of lived experience? But in a short period of time, we realized that once they were staying for their 3-month period, they were just returning to the street again. So all we were doing was giving a little bit of a respite. So we then started looking at what we could deliver in the way of services, particularly social work and psychological support and detox, with the 3 main priority areas. So we then built this comprehensive program around them to address not only their basic needs, but to try and help them get back onto their feet and back into the community as any normal other person. And we started having a great deal of success with that. But then the demography of homelessness changed. So we had a burst of older people losing their homes through fraud. And then we were starting to have more and more women. And then back in 2005, there was an explosion of family poverty and family homelessness. So we then started taking in homeless families, trying to keep the family together, because what the local authorities were doing, they were able to provide emergency shelter on condition that the children went into the state care system. And we were trying desperately to hold the family together. And that's how we started with families. Then, of course, we quickly understood that one of the leading causes of family homelessness was domestic abuse.
At this stage, at present, Casa Ioana is a shelter in particular, as I understand it, for women and children who escape domestic abuse. How big is the house? How many families do mothers and children, regardless of how many children, do they all come? Can you provide that sort of open arms accommodation to all of them, regardless of their numbers?
No, so we're limited in this particular centre where we are now is our biggest one, and we can accommodate 9 families. Basically, because we are working more with domestic abuse, that means 9 single-parent mothers with up to 22 accompanied children. So we have very large rooms. And then we have a communal kitchen and meeting room, which is really the hub of Casa Ioana. We have another centre in another part of Bucharest, which we are currently hoping to refurbish. We have to comply with the new minimum standards. So we're hoping to open that in the summer of next year, and that will accommodate another 7 families. But for every family we accommodate, I mean, there's another 15 plus waiting to come in. So the waiting list is huge.
It's a huge demand. And when they come to Casa Ioana, they obviously receive a lot of support in terms of safety, in terms of catching their breath and trying to reassess their lives. But you also provide much more than that, a set of skills, really, which should support them to sort of leave Casa Ioana better equipped to face life and hopefully become a bit more independent. What are those skills?
In a general term, they're what we would call life skills. So It's female hygiene, reproductive health, childcare, how to look after children, how to get the best out of children, the importance of early learning with their children. Then we look at nutrition, cooking on a budget. We have pro bono professional chefs come in to do that. We have a huge variety of pro bono volunteers, professionals who come in and help us with all this sort of skills training. So moreover, we realized when we were just doing the financial literacy training with them, that one woman stood up and said, but what good is knowing about money if I haven't got money in the first place? And whoa, hold on, yes, the truth behind that. So then working with local companies, we put together a training program. So we have 6 workshops on soft skills for the workplace, what employers are really looking for with employees, prospective employees. So we wrote these workshops, and now we do these on a regular basis. But we also work with company PR specialists who help with individual career advice, help with CVs, job interview techniques, and so on. So what we're trying to do is break down any barriers that prevent women getting decent employment, trying to raise their expectations about employment as well. So it's not just a convenient supermarket job or a convenient cleaning job, but hey, maybe I can work in an office, maybe I can earn more money, maybe I can advance myself professionally. So we work with all of that as well. And of course, childcare is very, very important. So we work with other agencies to try and get that childcare provided.
So it's safety, it's confidence, it's skills, it's support for children, and how the interaction with the parents is developing. How long can they stay at Casa Ioana?
They can stay up to 1 year. The majority are ready to move on between 4 and 6 months. We do get some who will stay on, excuse me, just a little while longer because they have very complex needs. Our success criteria is children into regular school, mums into decent, well-paid employment, and families living in private rented accommodation, because social housing as such is non-existent here now. And that's a very, very high success criteria when you understand that many of our families have been living on the streets with their children before coming into Casa Ioana. So it's a huge leap for them. But our success rate is on average 84–85% year on year. Nobody goes back on the streets. Nobody leaves Casa Ioana and goes back on the streets. If they need ongoing support, then we work with other NGOs or other agencies to make sure that support is in place. And those that do leave don't necessarily leave their support, psychological and social support behind either. That continues for as long as they need it.
In terms of figures, what sort of figures can you give us about the number of women, children, families who so far have benefited from the support and services at Casa Ioana?
Well, we're talking about 25 years of working Casa Ioana, and in that time, we've given new beginnings to 5,394 single adults, 6,015 families, including 7,601 children. So we have very, very impressive figures.
Great social impact. You mentioned earlier that for every family who can be admitted at Casa Ioana, there are the 15 or so who are on the waiting list. We have seen during this pandemic a huge increase in terms of domestic violence, which is not just a Romanian issue, it's a truly global issue. And just last month here in the UK, where I am at the moment, a report was published which shows exactly this, that during this pandemic, domestic violence has gone up and there are not enough places. What are the figures like in Romania?
Well, for comparison's sake, in 2019, the police reported 44,000, just over 44,000 cases of physical violence against or domestic abuse committed in Romania, with 51 fatalities. So that's virtually a woman a week losing her life because of domestic abuse in Romania. We know at the start of the pandemic that the hotline for domestic abuse, the calls to the hotline more than doubled. We saw a huge increase in the number of phone calls that we were receiving, not only from the authorities and other NGOs, but the general public who were coming across people who were victims of domestic abuse as well, and homelessness. So there was a great demand on our services. And it's heartbreaking because they come here expecting a place and we have to just take their details and put them on a waiting list. So it's stress for all of us, stress for them, stress for the staff team, and stress for the residents who are living here, because they were once one of those people walking in through those doors and were lucky enough to get a place, whether it be in time or not. We kept our doors open throughout the pandemic, which was not easy, but we made the commitment to do it, and we have. So we're happy that we did that.
The context is quite difficult, because you have this increase in demand, and at the same time we have a health crisis and an economic crisis. And I know this from other charities, that the financial pressures on so many charities is really, really to the point that some of the charities may not survive the pandemic. We've seen a lot of donations from traditional donors being redirected to medical charities or medical initiatives, which of course is entirely understandable in a pandemic. But then we have the risk that charities which support women who suffer domestic abuse or other vulnerable people in the society may really struggle to survive this whole crisis. And I wonder how much Casa Ioana has been affected by this ongoing crisis.
Yes, we've been affected very much indeed. I mean, as you mentioned, our traditional donors have moved away to support health services, as you said quite rightly, unsurprisingly, bearing in mind the stretch of the pandemic here and elsewhere around the world. But it's also affected our traditional fundraising methods. So we normally have a large gala, annual gala, which collects the bulk of our money each year. And of course, unfortunately, we've not been able to hold that because of the COVID-19 restrictions. We tried an online gala, which didn't really work. So we have to try and be as creative as we possibly can with our fundraising methods. We can't afford a marketing company to come and help us devise campaigns and so on. So we have to do that within our own resources. And we do have some outside people who have a little bit of experience in that, so we can work with them as well to do this. But I mean, Romania is very, very fortunate in the sense that the Romanian government allows companies to give 20% of their profit tax to Romanian NGOs and so on. But experience shows us that it's all about connections. So it's who you know within the company and who can spread the word about you in the company. If you knock on the door with a cold call, from experience, we know it takes 4 years before you get a positive result. So we work 4 years behind, if you like, for our budget in the future. But yeah, I mean, it's hit us badly. I had to look at laying off a social worker a little while ago, but we managed to keep her on. My team are not on very big salaries, unfortunately, although they've been with me for 13 years. So I've got such a loyal and committed staff team. to be unbelievable, really. I mean, they're just an amazing team. So yeah, I mean, I spend the vast majority of my time trying to find funds. But the difficulty really is not being able to budget. So, I mean, I don't know how much money I have for 2021. I know what I have for the next two months, maybe 3 months, but that's about it. So it's catch up all the time. It's difficult. It's very difficult.
Well, I very much hope, Ian, that this campaign, because this interview is part of a fundraising campaign, which aims to connect Casa Ioana with Romanians who live in the United Kingdom. And I think it's a very small world. You, a Britishman, live in Romania for so long and make such contributions to society. And from here, a lot of Romanians who made the UK their home and want to give something back, hopefully, and despite the difficulties, hopefully we will be able to come together as a community to contribute to the amazing work of Casa Ioana. I'm always amazed how small the world is, in the sense that, and this crisis probably has shown us yet again, that we are in this together, and the solidarity and the contributions we can actually make and support we can give to each other, it can be so substantial and can really make a difference to so many charities. So on this note, thank you again for your time. It was very, very lovely to talk to you.